Hello, welcome to Health Chat. I'm your host, Dr. Alancia Wynn. Warm weather, yay, who doesn't love warm weather? Picnics in the park, cookouts in the backyard, weekends at the beach or at the pool. It's great. It's lovely to be outside in the warm weather. With the long hot days of spring and summer, you want to spend more time outside. But being outside definitely comes with risks that you can overcome, just like anything else, if you know what the risks are, know how to avoid them or mitigate them. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, some of the risks you want to think about when you're spending more time outside. So, for instance, when you go out swimming. Now, swimming is a great way to stay cool. It is not without its risks. And lounging poolside or on the beach brings with it the risk of sun overexposure. As with anything, however, the risk of being out in the sun, being overexposed to the sun, can be controlled or minimized. Every year, approximately 150,000 injuries occur as a result of swimming accidents, a large percentage of them occurring in privately owned pools. So we're talking in apartment complexes, homes, things like that. More than 850 of these injuries are spinal cord injuries, resulting in paralysis. The vast majority of these spinal cord injuries come from diving. The most important factor in avoiding these diving type of accidents is knowing the depths of the water before diving. If you're diving into a pool, you do not want to dive into the water if you can either not see the bottom of the pool or if there are no depth markers, so you have no way of knowing how deep the water is. If you're diving into natural water, river, lake, something like that, you want to dive in only after determining that the water is deep enough and that there are no objects below the surface, no rocks, no areas where the water becomes more shallow than in other areas, for instance. So beyond diving, another risk of swimming in open water are strong currents, which can be dangerous for even the strongest swimmers. You want to heed any posted warnings about strong currents, especially riptides. Now, what a riptide is, it's a current that is especially strong in just a localized area. It's not the current overall, it's just a current localized in an area. So anytime that you see any areas, any warnings that are about riptides, you do not want to swim into the riptide. The one thing you want to think about is even the strongest swimmer cannot outswim a riptide. Typically what a riptide does is it runs parallel to the shore. So if the shore is this way, it runs this way. So you don't want to panic and try to swim toward the shore because you're swimming across the current. You'll tire yourself out. Eventually the current will take you further out to sea. So if you're caught in a riptide, you want to swim along with the current. You want to swim parallel to the shore until you swim out of the riptide, and then once the current feels normal and soft, then you can swim into the shore. When you're swimming in a lake or a river, you don't want to swim in that area after flooding because there the currents may be stronger than typical, and there's also a possibility of underwater hazards, things that have been, any type of debris, anything that may have been flowed into that area because of the flooding. And so when you're going swimming, it's also important to think about the weather that you're going to be while you're going to be swimming. So you want to check the weather forecast before you go swimming. It is very dangerous to be caught in the water during storms, fog, or windy conditions. And you also want to remember that water conducts electricity, so it's especially dangerous to be swimming during an electrical storm. Now what that means is that if a lightning strike hits the water, that electricity from the lightning will conduct through the water and into you if you're out in the water. So even if you're not initially struck by lightning specifically, the electricity will conduct from where it did strike into you, which is why you don't want to be swimming during an electrical storm. So we've talked a little bit about the things that are external to you when you're swimming, things you want to watch out for. But that's not the only thing you want to be concerned about or cautious about. You also want to think about your own condition before you go swimming, how you feel, what's going on with your body, your mental state, physical state as well. You don't want to swim if you're really tired, if you're really cold, or if you're overheated, because any of those can make it harder for you to swim because then you won't be at your optimal condition. You don't want to go swimming alone, even if you are a really strong swimmer. You've been on the swim team since you were 5 years old. You still don't want to swim alone because you might get a cramp, you might get stung by a jellyfish, something like that. There's always risks to being in the water, so you don't ever want to swim alone. And if you are someone who does not swim well, or especially if you don't swim at all, you don't want to go into the water without a type of personal flotation device, such as a life vest, one of the pool noodles, boogie board, any of that kind of stuff. You want to have something on that will help you stay afloat in the water. It's always a good idea to not really go into water beyond a certain level, really shallow water, if you are not a strong swimmer, and you definitely don't want to be around water if you are not with someone who is a good swimmer who potentially could rescue you if need be, or if there's no life guard around. Now, drugs and alcohol can affect both your vision, your stamina, and your coordination, so you don't want to be using any of these when you're near water. In the water, on the water, near the water. So we're talking, you don't want to do this if you're out on a boat. We don't want to do it if you're poolside. You don't want to do it if you're really close to the water at a beach, anything like that. Another risk for being outside around water when you're outside is the sun. Granted, that's part of the reason why you want to be outside on the beach or on the pool, but you do want to be careful about being out in the sun, because there's risk for sunburn, premature aging, and long-term skin damage, like, for instance, skin cancer. So you want to always use sunscreen when you're going to be out, because sunscreen is the most important weapon in the fight against these damaging effects of the sun. Now, sunscreen is labeled with a number. It's called an SPF number. What SPF stands for is sun protection factor. So that indicates the amount of the UVB rays which are blocked. So let me go back a little bit first. There are UVA rays and there are UVB rays in sunlight. Obviously, you can't see either of them because UV stands for ultraviolet, which means they're beyond the level where the human eye can see them. But UVA rays and UVB rays. And so the SPF factor on your sunscreen is talking about just the UVB rays. There is no rating system for UVA rays, although they are working to figure one out, but as of right now, the SPF is just for UVB rays. Now, what that number means is it indicates how long it takes for skin that's protected with that product to burn compared with unprotected skin. For example, if you're wearing a product that has an SPF 15, that means it takes your skin 15 times longer to burn than it does for someone who's wearing no sunscreen at all. Some sunlight does get through all sunscreens, however, which is why you can still get a tan or a burn with sunscreen. So even if you use it properly, you can still get sunburned. In addition, so one thing you also want to think about is that the amount of protection in sunscreen does not increase proportionally with the SPF number, which means that an SPF 30 is not twice as strong as an SPF 15. So the SPF 30 blocks about 97% of UVB rays, and SPF 15 blocks about 93%. So you can see that's not twice as much, but it is more. So, and therefore you can see that there's also not a very big jump from 15 to 30. So anything over 30, you're not getting a whole lot of additional protection. So if you see some of these products which are SPF 45, 60, even higher, you're spending a lot more money and you're not getting a whole lot additional protection. You can certainly buy those products, obviously, but you're not getting the protection that you might think you're getting by buying those extra products, the extra protection in those products. Now, who should use sunscreen? The easy answer is everybody. Everybody, anytime you're outside where there's any outdoor exposure at all, even on cloudy days. Even during the workday when you're just walking from your car to the office building, anytime you're outside, you should wear sunscreen. Now, the question is always how much you should put on. You need to put it on properly. You need to put it on in the correct places, and you need to put it on in the right time frame. So it should be applied to dry skin at least 15 minutes before going outside, because you want it to dry, you want it to absorb into your skin. It should also be reapplied after swimming or any type of excessive sweating. And this is true even for waterproof products. And you should also reapply it every 2 hours if you're outside for an extended period of time. Now, ladies, if you're wearing makeup during the day, during the workday, you want to get a foundation that has an SPF in it. That way you'll have that protection every day as you're walking around doing your errands, going to work, whatever. So how much sunscreen should you put on? If you can imagine a shot glass, which is about 2 ounces, you should put half of that for an average adult. And you should put it on all exposed areas of the skin. Anything that's not covered by clothing. And things you want to make sure you don't forget: behind the ears, the back of the ears, the backs of the hands, the back of the neck, around the hairline, all those type of areas. And you also want to use a lip balm on your lips that contains a sunscreen of at least an SPF 15. You want to protect those lips as well. In addition to sunscreen, some other things you want to think about: other ways to protect your skin against sun. You want to limit the amount of exposure you have to the sun. So the American Academy of Dermatology has several recommendations as far as when you should be out in the sun and what things you should do to decrease your risk for these issues from sun exposure. You want to avoid the strongest sun of the day, which is typically in this area between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And that you want to seek shade whenever possible. So you don't want to be out in bright sun for extended periods of time. You want to break it up by being in shade, under a tree, under an umbrella if you're on the beach, something like that. You want to wear a wide-brimmed hat. You want to wear some sunglasses. Sunglasses will not only protect the very gentle, very thin skin around your eyes, it will also help protect your eyes themselves. And the hat will help protect your ears, which are thinner, and protect your face, which is more susceptible to the sun than the thicker skin on your arms, your legs, and other places. You want to wear protective clothing when you're out for extended periods of time as well. The lighter the color of the clothing and the thinner the clothing, the less protection you have from it. So if you're wearing a really thin white t-shirt, you're not getting a whole lot of protection, whereas if you're wearing blue jeans, you're getting more protection from the sun. You want to take that into account as well. You want to follow what's called the shadow rule. And what does the shadow rule say? It means that the sun's rays are at their strongest when your shadow is shorter than you are. So if you walk outside and you're 5'3", but your shadow is only about 2 feet long, then that means the sun is pretty close to overhead, which means it's the time of day when the sun's rays are at their strongest. So you should avoid altogether that sun exposure or minimize it as much as possible. And it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, you want to stay away from tanning beds, because what tanning beds are is just really, really condensed high exposure to the UVB rays. So you definitely want to stay away from those, because it definitely increases your risk for premature aging, sun cancer, sunburns, all the other risks of being out in the sun. So now that we've talked about sun and water, which are things you want to think about, let's want to talk about our little critters that we come in contact with when we're outdoors as well. And so the more time you're outside, the more exposure you have to these biting insects. Now, these insects have the potential to definitely become more than just an annoyance, because some of them, depending on which ones we're talking about, they can definitely spread disease. They can spread things like Lyme disease, West Nile virus, Zika virus, several different other viruses. So we're going to start talking about Lyme disease first. So you may have heard the term before, but what Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria that is spread by ticks. Predominantly it's spread through deer ticks or black ticks. Now, deer ticks are a little bit different than the ticks that commonly are on your dog and your cat if you're outside. So you can see what a deer tick looks like, and then you can see that this is the tick that a dog or a cat might pick up. So you see the deer ticks are considerably smaller, so you can tell the difference. Obviously, if you have any question or concern about which tick it is, you want to err on the side of caution. Now, Lyme disease is particularly common in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, and the Pacific Coast areas of the United States. So we're right in a hotbed of Lyme disease in this area. Now, the bacteria live in the salivary glands of the tick. So it's spread to humans when the tick bites a human and then latches on and feeds on the human for 2 or more days. So if you find a tick and you pull it off immediately, then you're not going to get Lyme disease. It really has to be on for an extended period of time to have time to spread the bacteria to a person. So what are the common symptoms of Lyme disease? So the most common early symptom of Lyme disease is what's called the bullseye rash. And you can see it here. And it looks typically just like a bullseye. You can see it's red in the center, you've got a clearing circle, and then you got a red circle around that. Some other early symptoms are pretty nonspecific. You might have a little bit of a fever, you might have a headache, might have some kind of vague joint pain, some muscle aches, you might feel a little tired. If it does not get treated in that early stage, it can progress beyond that, where you might get multiple of those bullseye rashes. It may spread to involve your nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord. You might get what's called meningitis, which is an infection of the brain or the spinal cord. It may affect your heart as well. If it progresses even further than that, and this we're talking weeks to months, even years later, it can progress into what we call chronic Lyme disease. And that's when it causes actual arthritis, and that involves one or more joints. It can affect your personality. It can cause problems sleeping. It can cause trouble thinking clearly, functioning. It is, however, rarely, if ever, fatal. Now, how do we diagnose Lyme disease? A lot of times it's just based strictly on the symptoms. If a patient comes in and they say, I've been out hiking in the woods, I found a tick, and now I've got these symptoms, most times the doctor is just going to treat them for Lyme disease without doing any other testing. If there's any uncertainty about the diagnosis, then we can order a blood test which can confirm the diagnosis. The blood test, however, does not usually become positive until several weeks after the initial symptoms or the initial tick bite, so that's another reason why we don't do the blood test on a regular basis. So you go to your doctor, you get diagnosed with Lyme disease, then how do you get treated? The treatment is antibiotics, antibiotic pills. Usually the treatment lasts anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks if the disease is caught in that early stage. If you're in one of those later stages, especially if you've gone on to the chronic stage, then you'll need 4 weeks or more of antibiotics, but they'll need to be through an IV in the hospital to treat it because it's spread beyond the early stage. You especially need those antibiotics through the IV if you start to develop those neurologic symptoms, you know, the personality changes, the trouble thinking, things like that. Treatment failures have been known to occur and retreatment may be necessary. But the number one thing in preventing Lyme disease is to prevent the tick bites. If you're out in an area where you might run into risk for picking up ticks, you want to wear protective clothing, such as long pants, boots, long socks, long pants. If you're going to be out gardening or something like that, you might want to consider wearing gloves as well. And think about tucking the pants into your socks, which will also give you another layer of protection, because that way the ticks can't crawl up the socks under the pants. It's a good idea to wear light-colored clothing so that the ticks can be seen on the clothing. And you want to wear insect repellent such as DEET on any exposed skin. That will kill the ticks on contact. And there's something called permethrin, which you can use to treat your clothes, which will also kill the ticks on contact. After you've been in an area that has ticks, you want to examine all areas of your skin, whether they've been out from under the clothing or not, for ticks, and you want to remove any ticks that you see as soon as possible. You want to remove them with fine-tip tweezers. And there's no need to be concerned if you leave the mouth on, because remember, you have to have the salivary glands, which are in the midgut and in the head. So as long as you get that off, then there's no risk for exposure to Lyme disease. Now, West Nile virus is another thing that's carried, but this one is carried by mosquitoes. So it's carried in the salivary glands of mosquitoes. So it's spread when a mosquito carries someone who is carrying it, such as an animal or another person that already has West Nile, and then they bite another person. And so there have been rare cases of West Nile virus in people, but the vast majority of them are in animals. Now, back in 2002, there were a few cases of West Nile virus that were spread via blood transfusions and transplanted organs, but again, very, very rare. And so thus far, West Nile virus has been very rare in humans, and less than 1% of the humans who are infected with West Nile virus develop severe illness. Usually it begins with pretty nonspecific symptoms: fever, headache, muscle aches, kind of a vague rash. Symptoms usually start 3 to 14 days following the mosquito bite. As it progresses, you may develop high fevers, severe headaches, stiff neck, get confused, maybe some muscle weakness, paralysis. In rare cases, it may even progress to coma and or death. The diagnosis of it is done with a blood test, which usually becomes positive within 8 days of the symptom onset. So if you have been exposed, if you've been bitten by mosquitoes and you have any of these symptoms, it's a good idea to get to your doctor and get tested. Now, there's no specific treatment for West Nile virus. The treatment involves just managing the symptoms and preventing any complications, such as getting any other infections, getting dehydrated, having any breathing difficulties. The last thing I want to mention is Zika virus, which has been in the news recently. So about 1 in 5 people who are infected with Zika virus actually develop symptoms. So the vast majority of people who are infected never even know they have it. The most common symptoms, again, very vague: fever, rash, joint pain. Sometimes you can get some red eyes. Other common symptoms: muscle pain, headache. The time from exposure to symptoms is not known, but it's likely to be somewhere between a few days to a week. The illness is usually mild, with symptoms lasting anywhere from several days to a week. People usually, when they get Zika, they don't get sick enough to go to the hospital, and they very rarely die of Zika. Most times if they get it, they think they may have a cold or the flu or something like that. Zika virus usually remains in the blood of an infected person for about a week after they've been infected, but it can be found longer in some people. And it has been found in other bodily fluids. It's been found in semen, it's been found in saliva, it's been found in breast milk. We're still learning a lot more about Zika. There have been some cases where the virus has been spread through sexual transmission. There have been no known cases where it's been spread through exchange of saliva, such as kissing, or through breast milk. The main risk for Zika is if a woman who is pregnant gets Zika, because it's at increased risk to the baby, not so much to the mother, but to the baby. It can cause poor development of the brain, which is called microcephaly, which means the head is abnormally small. It can also cause the fetus to die, so the main things we want people to watch out for Zika. So is there a treatment for Zika? Not really. The main treatment is to just treat the symptoms. You want to get plenty of rest. You want to drink plenty of fluids to prevent dehydration. You want to take a medicine like Tylenol or acetaminophen to relieve the fever and pain. You don't want to take any aspirin or any other anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen or naproxen. You really want to stick to just Tylenol. And if you are taking any other medicine for any other medical conditions, you want to talk to your healthcare provider before taking any additional medicine for the symptoms. And if you do have Zika, if you've been diagnosed with Zika, for the first week of your illness, you want to minimize the risk of you getting bitten by a mosquito. Because if you get bitten, then that mosquito can then bite someone else and transmit Zika to them. So you want to, if you're outside, you want to be sure that you wear insect repellent, wear clothing so that you don't get bitten. Again, that's more of a public health issue, so that you don't spread the virus to other people. And so, as we talked about with Lyme disease, prevention of the mosquito bite is the key to disease prevention. Insect repellent, like I talked about. And so you want to wear that during all outdoor activities, especially those around sunset or after dark, because that's when the mosquitoes typically bite more. And if you're going to be outside for extended periods of time, you want to consider using that permethrin on your clothing. So if you're going to be sleeping outside, say if you go camping or hunting or something like that, you might want to consider getting a mosquito net to sleep under that, which will decrease your risk for getting bitten by a mosquito overnight when you're asleep. You want to repair any window and door screens in your home so that no mosquitoes can get inside your home. And another way you want to help decrease the spread of anything that's spread by mosquitoes is you want to keep your property free of anything that can collect standing water, because it only takes a few days of standing water for mosquitoes to breed, and then that will increase the population. And it doesn't take very much water. It could be an old tire, it can be a a planter that doesn't have any dirt in it. It could even be, you know, a table that has a puddle on it. So you want to get rid of any standing water around your house at all. Again, just as a way to help decrease the mosquito population in general, to decrease the risk for all the diseases we've talked about, as well as any other diseases that are spread by mosquito bites. So I know I've thrown a lot of information at you today, and I hope I didn't scare you off of spending time outside in the beautiful weather in the spring and summer months. But you just take a few precautions. Just think about these things. Wear your sunscreen, wear your insect repellent, and minimize the time you're out in the sun during the heat of the day, and that will definitely keep you healthy long term. This has been Health Chat. I'm Dr. Alancia Wynn. If you have any questions about any of this, you can contact me here at the station. If you have any questions about your health condition yourself, just be sure to talk to your regular physician. Until next time, I'm Dr. Alancia Wynn. Have a good day. Bye-bye.